I still remember the morning my landlord banged on my door like he was the police. It was barely 7 a.m. and his voice echoed down the narrow hallway of the old apartment building. "Open up, Ethan, we need to talk about your rent," he shouted. My stomach tightened not because I hadn't paid, but because I already knew what this was really about. When I opened the door, Richard Mallory stood there, slick-back gray hair, gold watch, expensive leather shoes, and that fake smile he wore when he was about to do something awful. He looked around my tiny one-bedroom apartment like it offended him just by existing. "You're 2 days late," he said, tapping the doorframe with a rolled-up piece of paper. "That's a breach of your lease." I told him I'd already sent the payment. He didn't care. "Doesn't matter, I've already filed the paperwork. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon." His smirk widened, enjoying every second of my shock. I felt my heart drop. Court for 2 days? But deep down, I knew this wasn't about rent. This was about control. Richard liked to pick tenants who wouldn't fight back: young people, single moms, immigrants. The kind of folks who were too tired or scared to stand up to him. He turned to leave, but before he did, he leaned close and whispered, "You should have kept quiet about the mold complaint." Then he walked off, his shoes clicking on the wooden floor like gunshots. That was the moment I realized he was punishing me. 2 weeks earlier, I had reported a growing black mold issue in my kitchen to the city's housing authority. My younger sister, Lily, had gotten sick after visiting me, coughing for days. I'd sent photos, even a sample. The inspector said they'd look into it, but apparently they'd also informed the property owner, Richard. That same day, he raised my rent by $200. When I refused, he suddenly found violations in my lease: loud noise complaints, damage to the bathroom tiles, missing rent receipts, lies, every single one of them. For days, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up sweating, imagining eviction notices, court dates, losing the small apartment I'd worked so hard to keep. I didn't have family nearby, no one to fall back on. My job at the print shop barely covered the bills. Then, a week after his visit, I came home to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside, a court summons. I was being sued for breach of contract and property damage. My hands shook as I read the words. He wasn't bluffing, he wanted me gone. That night, as I sat in the dark staring at the summons, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a woman named Grace Reynolds. The subject line read, "You're not the first." I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single line: "If Richard Mallory is taking you to court, contact me before you respond." I froze. How did she know? I almost deleted it, thinking it might be spam, but something about it felt real. My gut told me to reply, so I did. Within minutes, she responded. She said she used to live in the same building. Richard had tried to sue her too over unpaid rent that she'd already paid, but when she went to court, she discovered something strange. Richard had submitted altered bank statements and falsified maintenance reports. She tried to expose him, but he'd scared her off with threats and a private investigator following her for weeks. I asked her how she found me. She said she set up alerts for his name in public court filings. She wanted to warn his next victims. I sat there, speechless. The anger I'd been holding back for weeks turned into something else: determination. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. The next morning, I took the day off work and went to the county clerk's office. I wanted to see everything Richard had filed. When the clerk handed me the case file, I flipped through the pages: fake signatures, incorrect payment logs, even maintenance reports signed by contractors who didn't exist. But one document stopped me cold: a repair invoice for the same mold issue I had reported. It was dated 3 months before I moved in, proof that he knew about it all along. He hadn't just ignored it, he'd covered it up. I left the office with shaking hands and copies of everything. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew who could help: Grace. She agreed to meet that evening at a small diner near the highway. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately: mid-30s, tired eyes, carrying a worn folder. She looked like someone who'd been through hell and barely made it out. She didn't waste time. "He's been doing this for years," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "Fake leases, double billing, false eviction cases, and when people fight back, he threatens them with ruin." Inside the folder were photos, receipts, even emails from tenants who had left the building terrified. One story was about a single mother whose car was mysteriously towed after she complained about a gas leak. Another was an elderly man who fell down the stairs after the railing he'd reported broken was never fixed. "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" I asked. Grace sighed. He has friends in the city council, in housing, even his cousin works in the local court office. Complaints vanish before they go anywhere. That's when it clicked. That's why my inspection request disappeared. That's why my emails went unanswered. He had people protecting him. I felt sick, all those people he'd hurt, all because he thought he was untouchable. Grace leaned forward. But maybe we can change that. If we can prove a pattern, real, documented fraud, we could take it to the state housing board, or even the press. Her eyes burned with the same anger I felt inside. Over the next few days, we gathered everything we could: old leases, payment receipts, maintenance reports. Grace introduced me to two more former tenants who had their own horror stories. Each one showed a pattern of forged documents, illegal rent hikes, and falsified eviction notices. But Richard was always one step ahead. The morning after I filed a complaint with the housing board, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was stolen, but my papers were scattered across the floor, my laptop wiped clean. It was a warning. I went to the police, but they shrugged. Probably just a break-in, one officer said. You can't prove it was him. That night I sat on my couch, feeling the walls close in. I'd started this fight thinking I could expose him, but now I wasn't sure if I'd survive it. Then out of nowhere, I got a call from an unknown number. Ethan, a deep voice said, "You're making a mistake." I froze. "Drop the complaint," the voice continued, "or things will get ugly. You don't know who you're dealing with." Before I could say anything, the call ended. My hands were trembling. I tried calling back, no answer. I checked the call log, blocked number. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake, listening for footsteps outside my door. The next morning, I found a note slipped under it. "Court can destroy you," it said in black marker, "but I can destroy you faster." That was it. Fear turned into fury. If Richard wanted war, I'd give him one. Grace and I decided to take everything to a journalist she knew, a man named Paul Whitaker. He'd done exposés on corrupt landlords before. When we met him, he looked skeptical at first until he saw the documents. "This is bigger than a tenant dispute," he said, flipping through the forged invoices. "If this checks out, we're looking at systemic fraud, property violations, maybe even bribery." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. We spent hours at his office scanning every piece of evidence: emails, receipts, copies of fake maintenance forms. Paul promised to cross-reference them with city permits and financial records. 2 days later, I got another call, but this time, it wasn't from a blocked number. It was from Richard. "You think you're clever, huh?" he hissed, going around behind my back, talking to reporters. "You'll regret this, Ethan." I tried to stay calm. "I just want the truth out." He laughed, a low, menacing sound. "Truth? You don't even know what you're dealing with. Do you think people like me lose? You'll be out on the street before you can say tenant rights." Then he hung up. 2 days later, I came home to find a sheriff's notice taped to my door. "Eviction granted. Tenant must vacate within 48 hours." I couldn't believe it. The court date hadn't even happened yet. I called Grace in a panic and she rushed over. Together, we went straight to the courthouse. When the clerk pulled up my case file, her brow furrowed. "That's odd," she said. "There's a signed judgment here, but it's missing the judge's signature." Grace leaned closer. "What do you mean missing?" The clerk lowered her voice. "It looks inserted. This isn't standard." We exchanged a look. He was forging court orders now. Grace whispered, "He's desperate." But desperate people make mistakes. Paul called that night with an update. "I found something," he said, his voice tense. "Richard, been moving money through multiple shell companies. One of them was flagged last year for fraudulent property claims. And guess what? The judge assigned to your case, his campaign got donations from those same companies." It felt like I was staring into the heart of something rotten. This wasn't just one crooked landlord, it was an entire network. And somehow I'd stumbled right into it. I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that I might lose my home, or the thought that if we kept digging, we might expose something that people would kill to keep buried. That night, someone slashed the tires on Grace's car. Then the next morning, Paul didn't answer his phone. When I went by his office, it was dark. The door was locked, but taped to the glass was a note, "Closed for maintenance." Except it wasn't his handwriting. That's when I realized we weren't just uncovering crimes, we were becoming targets. And Richard wasn't finished yet. The next morning I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly. There were over a dozen missed calls from Grace. When I finally picked up, her voice was frantic. Ethan, Paul's gone. His office was cleared out last night. Files, computers, everything. I sat up, still groggy but alert. Gone? What do you mean gone? I mean gone, she said, almost whispering. No one's seen him since yesterday afternoon. His landlord said 2 men came by claiming to be from the city inspector's office, but the city has no record of that. I felt my throat go dry. Whoever Richard was working with, they weren't just powerful, they were organized. I ran my hands through my hair, packing the small apartment. My eviction notice was still taped to the wall, a reminder of how close I was to losing everything. Grace, we need to go to the police. This is too big now. She hesitated. And tell them what? That your landlord might have kidnapped a journalist. We have no proof. She was right. Without Paul's files, all we had were scattered documents and stories. No real leverage. But there was one thing Richard didn't know. Before Paul disappeared, he'd asked me to send him a backup copy of every file I had. I had emailed him everything, and just in case, I'd uploaded it all to a private cloud folder. And I still had access. I opened my laptop, praying the folder was still there. It was. Inside were hundreds of files, leases, transaction logs, even an internal email chain between Richard and someone named B. Kavanaugh. The messages mentioned covering inspection results, alternate filings, and removing problem tenants. It was all there. I called Grace back. I have everything, I said. If Paul's gone, we finish what he started. She didn't answer for a long moment. Then she said, meet me at my place tonight. We're not waiting anymore. That evening, I drove across town to her small house at the edge of the city. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slumped but determined. Her kitchen table was covered in documents, color-coded and sorted by date. Look at this, she said, spreading out papers. The same maintenance company name appears on every repair invoice Richard filed for the last 3 years, but when I look them up, they don't exist. It's a shell company. He's funneling money into fake repairs, billing tenants, and pocketing the cash. I stared at the papers, stunned. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. She nodded. At least, and that's just what we can see. We worked until midnight piecing everything together, every tenant complaint, every altered invoice, every fraudulent signature. The deeper we went, the clearer it became that Richard's business was built on fraud. But around 1 a.m., we both froze at the sound of a car pulling up outside. Headlights swept across the curtains. Grace moved quietly to the window and peeked through the blinds. Black SUV, she whispered, 2 men inside. My heart pounded. Maybe it's nothing. Then a door slammed, footsteps on the gravel. We killed the lights, the house went dark. For a few seconds there was silence, then 3 hard knocks on the door. Grace's breath hitched. Open up, a man's voice said. City Inspection Office, we have questions about a complaint you filed. We looked at each other, neither of us moved. Then the doorknob rattled, hard. Grace grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But before she could speak, a loud bang shook the front door. Someone had kicked it. Go, I hissed, grabbing the hard drive and the folder of documents. We slipped out the back door and ran through the yard, our shoes crunching against the damp grass. By the time we reached the street, the SUV's engine roared to life behind us. Headlights flashed. We sprinted toward my car parked 2 blocks away, lungs burning. Grace fumbled with the keys, threw open the door, and we peeled off just as the SUV turned the corner. Neither of us spoke for miles. Finally, Grace whispered, he's not going to stop. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel. Then neither will we. We drove straight to a motel outside town, checked in under fake names, and set up the laptop on the nightstand. I backed up everything again, this time encrypting the files. Grace started drafting an anonymous email to a national investigative news site. But before we hit send, something caught my eye. In the corner of one document, a scanned lease agreement from 2017, was a small signature, J. Mallory. Who's this? I asked. Grace zoomed in. That's not Richard's handwriting, maybe a family member. I searched the name online and froze. Jonathan Mallory, former city housing inspector, suspended 3 years ago for procedural misconduct. Richard's brother. And the signature appeared on multiple inspection reports, the same ones used to approve Richard's property ownerships. We sat in silence, realizing what this meant. Richard's entire operation was protected from the inside. Grace whispered, "They've been running this together." The next morning, we sent everything, the documents, the files, the email chain, to the national news outlet under an alias. Then, we waited. For 3 days, nothing, no response, no update. Every time a car slowed near the motel, we flinched. I barely slept, afraid someone would find us. Then, on the fourth morning, Grace woke me up with a trembling hand. "It's live," she said, eyes wide. There it was, front page headline: Landlord crime ring exposed, fraud, forged documents, and city corruption. They had published everything, including Richard's name, his brother's involvement, and screenshots of the forged leases. The story exploded online within hours. News vans gathered outside his properties, tenants gave interviews, and social media lit up with outrage. For a brief moment, it felt like we'd won. But victory came at a cost. By evening, Richard's lawyer went on television claiming the story was false, a smear campaign by disgruntled tenants. Then he announced that Richard would be filing defamation suits against those responsible for spreading false information. My heart sank. He was coming after us again. Grace tried to calm me. "He's desperate, he can't undo what's public now." But she was wrong. The next day, I went to check my bank account, frozen, every last cent. I called the bank and they said it was due to a pending court order. My paycheck from the print shop was withheld too. He was using his influence to crush me financially. That night, I found a letter slipped under the motel door. No envelope, no signature, just one sentence written in red ink. "You think the truth will save you, you don't know what truth costs." I stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. The next morning, I couldn't find Grace. Her car was gone. I called her, no answer. I tried again and again, nothing. Hours passed, then finally I got a text from an unknown number. "She's fine, stop digging." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't know if it was true or if it was a warning. I went to the police again, but they brushed me off. "Unless you have proof of kidnapping," the officer said, "there's nothing we can do." I walked out of the station feeling completely powerless. By evening, the motel felt colder, emptier. I sat there alone, staring at my laptop, at all the evidence that had already been exposed. But there was one thing I hadn't shared yet. Paul's last message. Before he vanished, he'd sent me one final text. "If anything happens to me, check folder Bluehouse. Password is the date of your first eviction notice." I opened the folder. Inside were scanned documents, blueprints, permit records, and photos of construction sites, but what they revealed made my blood run cold. Richard wasn't just a slumlord, he was laundering money through fake housing developments. One of them, a luxury complex called Bluehouse Estates, had received millions in public funds, but according to the blueprints, it was never actually built. The land was still an abandoned lot. That's where the missing money was going. And attached at the bottom of the folder was a single image, a blurry security photo of Richard meeting with two men in suits at night. One of them looked like his brother. The other, I couldn't tell. But something about that photo felt important. As I zoomed in, I noticed a reflection in a car window nearby, a logo, Department of Housing and Urban Development. He was meeting with federal officials. The scale of it hit me like a wave. This wasn't just local corruption, it was federal. And if the news ever got hold of this, Richard wouldn't just lose his business, he'd go to prison. But that also meant one thing. They would come for me next. That night I heard footsteps outside the motel door, slow, careful, then silence. I held my breath, clutching the laptop to my chest. Minutes passed, then a single knock echoed through the quiet. I didn't move. Another knock, louder. I backed away from the door, heart racing. Then, a familiar voice whispered from the other side. "Ethan, it's me. Grace." I opened the door a crack and froze. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked terrified. "Grace, what happened? Where were you?" She stepped inside, locking the door behind her. "They took everything," she whispered. "My house, my car, my phone. They said if I talk again, they'll make it look like I forged the documents." I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? She looked up at me trembling. Richard's brother and someone from the housing department. They're in on it together. Then she handed me a flash drive. This was all I could save. It's proof, but if you release it, they'll come after both of us. I stared at her knowing there was no turning back. Then we release it anyway. But before I could plug in the drive, the lights in the motel flickered and went out. We froze. Then from outside the sound of engines. Several of them. Grace's hand gripped mine. They found us. Engines roared outside the motel like a storm closing in. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was about to break. Grace's eyes darted toward the window, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, they're surrounding us. I peeked through the curtain. 3 SUVs, dark, unmarked, headlights pointing straight at the room. Shadows moved near the vehicles, silhouettes of men, tall, broad, deliberate. Grab everything, I said. We can't stay here. Grace stuffed the flash drive into her jacket pocket as I grabbed the laptop and hard drive. My pulse hammered in my ears. The hallway outside was quiet, too quiet. We slipped through the back door into the cold night air, running toward the line of trees behind the motel. Branches snapped under our feet. From behind us, I heard a door burst open, shouts, heavy boots pounding against concrete. Go, I yelled. We sprinted into the forest, the only light coming from the moon above and the faint glow of headlights cutting through the trees. Grace stumbled but kept running. I didn't dare look back. When we finally stopped, gasping for breath, we were deep enough that the motel lights were just distant flickers. My hands were shaking. Grace leaned against a tree, trying to catch her breath. They know about the Blue House files, she whispered. They know everything. I nodded. Then we get it out before they can stop us. We followed an old trail until we reached a small wooden shed, probably a ranger post or storage unit. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and old tools. We barricaded it with a broken shovel and sat on the floor, the laptop between us. I opened it. The battery was nearly dead. Grace handed me the flash drive. Paul said he had more, she said, something about a hidden account. I plugged it in. A single folder popped up, BLUHOUSE ledger. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, and one encrypted document labeled Project Silent Hand. When I opened it, a message appeared, requires authorization code. Grace frowned. What code? Then I remembered Paul's last text, the date of my first eviction notice. I typed it in. The document unlocked. Inside was a detailed record, names, dates, wire transfers, and signatures. Millions of dollars moved between Richard's properties, his brother's inspection office, and several government contractors. Some of the funds were labeled as community development grants, others tenant relocation reimbursements. But there was one name that made Grace gasp. At the bottom of the list was Councilman Barrett Kavanaugh. I stared at it in disbelief. The same B. Kavanaugh from the email chain, a sitting city councilman. Grace whispered, he's the one covering it all up. We sat there in stunned silence, realizing how deep the corruption went. This wasn't just a landlord scam, it was a full-blown criminal operation tied to city officials. Before we could react, headlights flashed through the cracks in the shed walls. They found us. I closed the laptop, grabbed the hard drive, and motioned for Grace to stay quiet. Footsteps crunched outside, voices low, male, professional. One of them said, they're on this side, spread out. Grace's hand found mine. What do we do? I took a breath. Run on 3. We burst out the back, sprinting through the trees again. Flashlights swept behind us, voices shouting, stop, don't move. A gunshot cracked through the night, bark splintered beside my head. Grace screamed but kept running, my lungs burned, my vision blurred. Up ahead, a faint glow, a highway, cars rushing by, indifferent to the chaos in the woods. We stumbled down a slope, crashing through the underbrush and tumbled onto the shoulder of the road. A truck swerved, honking. I waved frantically. Help, please. The driver hesitated, then slowed. He rolled down his window, a grizzled man with tired eyes. You two okay? No time, I gasped. Please just drive anywhere but here. He looked at the flashlights behind us, then nodded. Get in. We climbed into the back of the truck, hiding beneath a tarp. The driver gunned the engine. The sound of the SUVs faded behind us. Grace clutched my arm. What now? I stared out the small crack in the tarp, the trees blurring past. We finish it, we take it higher. By dawn, the truck dropped us off near the next town. Grace and I found a small diner, ordered coffee we didn't drink, and connected the laptop to the diner's Wi-Fi. The encrypted files, the ledger, the photos, we sent everything to multiple news outlets, state investigators, and one more recipient, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. When the emails were sent, we both exhaled for the first time in hours. It's out there now, Grace said softly. Even if they find us, they can't stop it. But the relief didn't last. A TV mounted above the diner counter flashed breaking news. The anchor's voice was tense. Local businessman and property owner Richard Mallory has been found dead this morning in an apparent car accident off Route 17. Authorities believe it was caused by brake failure. Grace froze mid-sip. I felt my stomach drop. Brake failure. Do you think she started? I nodded slowly. Someone silenced him. The broadcast continued, showing footage of police and reporters near a mangled black sedan. Investigators are not ruling out foul play, the anchor said. Grace whispered, if he's gone, then who's left? I thought of the ledger, the councilman's name, the ones above him. We stayed in that diner until nightfall, too afraid to go anywhere else. Every sound outside made us flinch. Every stranger's glance felt like surveillance. By midnight, the story had gone national. The FBI confirmed they were reviewing new evidence related to city housing fraud. The councilman issued a statement denying involvement, but within hours, reporters found that his campaign treasurer had resigned. It was unraveling, slowly, painfully, but it was happening. 2 days later, I got an email from an unknown sender. Subject line, you don't know me, but I believe you. The message read, I work for the City Records Division. I've seen what they've been hiding. There's more, a second ledger stored under Community Relief Initiative. It ties Kavanaugh to federal grants and forged development permits. I can get it to you, but you'll have to meet me tonight. The email ended with a location, an abandoned rail station just outside town. Grace looked at me. It's a trap. Maybe, I said, but if it's real, this could end it. She hesitated, then nodded. Then we go together. The rail station was a skeleton of steel and rust. Flickering lights buzzed weakly overhead. We waited near the tracks, the cold wind cutting through our clothes. After 10 tense minutes, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in his 40s wearing a city maintenance jacket. His eyes darted nervously. You're Ethan, he whispered. I nodded. Who are you? Doesn't matter, he said, handing me a small envelope. This has what you need, but you didn't get it from me. He turned to leave, but before he could take 2 steps, a gunshot echoed through the station. He collapsed instantly. Grace screamed. I froze, staring at the blood pooling beneath him. Another shot rang out, shattering the glass above us. Run, I shouted. We dove behind a rusted train car as bullets ricocheted off the metal. Grace clutched the envelope to her chest. I could hear footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate, echoing against the concrete. A voice called out, calm and controlled, you should have stayed quiet, Ethan. Councilman Kavanaugh. He stepped into the light, gun in hand, flanked by 2 men in suits. His expression was cold, almost pitying. You think you can expose people like us? He said. You're a nobody. You were supposed to be evicted, forgotten. I stood slowly, heart pounding. Then why are you here, afraid of a nobody? He smirked. No, just tying up loose ends. He raised the gun, but before he could fire, flashing lights filled the station. FBI, drop your weapon. Dozens of agents stormed in from every entrance. Kavanaugh spun around, shouting, but it was too late. He was tackled to the ground, his gun clattering across the concrete. I stood frozen as agents swarmed the area, shouting orders. Grace was shaking beside me, tears streaming down her face. An agent approached, flashing a badge. Mr. Lane, we received your files. You did the right thing. It was over. Or so I thought. The envelope Grace was clutching contained more than we imagined, documents linking several state officials to the fraud ring, and evidence that at least 2 accidental tenant deaths in Richard's buildings were cover-ups. The FBI launched a full investigation. Within weeks, arrests were made across the city. News headlines read, "Housing Scandal Rocks City Hall." Grace and I were placed under witness protection for several months. It was strange, new names, new addresses, pretending none of it had happened, but every time I looked at her, I remembered why we'd done it. One evening, months later, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photo: Paul Whitaker, alive, standing beside an FBI agent. On the back, in his handwriting, "Told you the truth matters." I smiled for the first time in a long while. But even now, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night to a sound outside my window, a car idling too long, a shadow that doesn't move. And I remember the voice that once told me, "You don't know what truth costs." Because he was right. Truth cost everything. But it was worth it. Months passed before life started to feel normal again. Grace and I had new names, a quiet home, and a kind of peace neither of us thought we'd ever find. Sometimes we'd sit outside on the porch listening to the wind, pretending we were just ordinary people, not survivors of something dark and buried. But peace never really stayed. It lingered like a ghost, fragile and temporary. One morning, I got a call from the FBI liaison who'd handled our case. "You might want to turn on the news," she said. When I did, my blood ran cold. The reporter's voice trembled as she spoke. "Councilman Kavanaugh has been found dead in his cell this morning in an apparent suicide. Officials suspect foul play." Another silence, another accident. Grace came to stand beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "They're still cleaning up," she whispered. I nodded. Someone higher up doesn't want this trail to lead any further. We both knew what that meant. The people behind the scheme still had power, and we were still just names on a list somewhere. That night, I opened the old laptop one last time. Inside the encrypted folders were files we hadn't released, names we'd been too afraid to expose. People who had funded the Blue House project, people who still walked free. Grace looked over my shoulder. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I hesitated, then clicked upload. "I'm done being afraid," I said. Within hours, the files spread across the internet. Journalists, watchdog groups, and citizen forums picked them apart piece by piece. Every secret Richard and his allies had buried came clawing its way back to the surface. And this time, no one could bury it again. Days later, Grace and I packed our bags and drove out of the city for good. We didn't leave a forwarding address. We didn't tell anyone where we were going. Somewhere quiet, somewhere green, far away from courtrooms, headlines, and ghosts of landlords past. As we crossed the state line, Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. "Do you ever wish you just paid the extra rent and kept quiet?" I smiled faintly. "Every day, and then I remember people like Richard counted on that." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "Then I'm glad you didn't." The sun dipped below the hills as the road wound ahead of us, long, empty, and full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, the silence felt like peace, not fear. Somewhere behind us, men like Richard and Kavanaugh had built their empires on silence. But silence breaks, and when it does, it never sounds the same again. I rolled down the window, letting the wind hit my face. The air smelled of rain and pine and something else: freedom. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. Because in the end, the truth didn't just destroy them. It set us free.